Well, I'll see if my voice carries. If it doesn't, please let me know. I'll use the microphone. I wanted to thank you all for coming here today because I know, the nemesis here in California is rain. And so when it rains, people don't leave the house. I'm the same way, but with snow and Washington. So I really wanted to thank you. I know you've come a lot of you have come from long distances, I thought Fred Haddad, my friend from third grade, won the prize because he came from Los Angeles. But then my brother-in-law, Dr. Bruce Appleyard, came from San Diego, so he lost the prize at the last second. And then I also wanted to thank Nazi Kaviani and the Diaspora Arts Connection. I've been kind of told not to name names, to name the organizations, but this is the only place that I'll be a rebel and do what I want. So I'm going to thank Nazi Kaviani. I want to thank Shaheen Tabrizi, which actually turned out to be my cousin, and who runs the Persian Center. These people are so selfless that they want to always be in the background. But their names have to be mentioned because without them, the Persian diaspora won't have a place to congregate. We all are busy with our jobs and work and all that. So this is really wonderful. I went Wednesday night. Persian Center had a gathering with about 20 to 30-year-old Iranians, all of them top-notch, Harvard, Stanford, Berkeley, winners of the Olympiad in math, physics. Very, very impressive, and it gave me hope for the future of Iran. And I talked to a few of them, and they said, your generation, of course not our generation, our parents' generation is what they meant. But we're old enough that they think we're the parents' generation. They said, well, your parents' generation, you guys ruined it so much, it's even hard for us ever if we went back to fix it. It's so messed up. And I said, that doesn't matter. You guys are ambassadors of our culture, of our heritage, and the beauty of Iran, which unfortunately, because of all of the negative press and all this stuff, it's pushed under the rug. And nobody sees what a great, it was the first world empire. So that's all I have to say. The first world empire has a lot to offer to the world. But politics, unfortunately, has made it such that people are not interested. They hear the name Iran and all of a sudden they get upset. But too bad for them, because we are all going to be ambassadors and make them realize that. And a lot of Americans who know us all of a sudden learn that, and that's what I'm happy about. I also wanted to thank Suzanne Parry, who's here, famous author. She did an interview with me for the San Francisco State Institute, Iranian Institute for Diaspora Studies, and it was a very unique interview because most of the interviews I do, they ask the same questions, but she went a total different direction. And we talked about the fact that art and music and all, writing and so forth, all these Iranians, as Nazi was saying, doesn't get much attention, or even if it only gets attention when you become famous in the States. That's what I've noticed. For example, my own dad, he worked for Banque Markazi, the central bank of Iran, and I talked to Suzanne about this, that even though our music had gone to number 6 on Billboard charts, he still was more excited and impressed to tell people I worked for the EPA. I had a government job with the EPA. Because it's just something ingrained in us that, okay, the music, until when we did hit 6, and a lot of his friends wanted CDs, he was very excited all the time. It was like, hey, you have a CD, so-and-so wants it, so-and-so wants it. So it's unfortunate because not everybody can be blessed and lucky enough like we were, that really, and we got lucky because there are many musicians much better than us, I must say. They are, but their work is just not exposed. Not saying that our work wasn't good, I think it was. But so anyway, so I wanted to thank Dr. Persis Karim, also of San Francisco State University. She's in Mexico on holiday. But all of the 3, Nazi and Shaheen and Persis, were instrumental in getting this wonderful group here today and having this wonderful gathering. So I really appreciate it. One last person I want to thank is Mel. He runs the East Bay Media Center, and this is also a nonprofit. So whenever you guys are thinking about donating to the Diaspora Arts Connection and other nonprofits, please keep in mind the East Bay Media Center, because without them, this wouldn't have been possible.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. So I, decided, my interviews have mostly been Zoom meetings, and so I've been getting questions asked and I answer them. So I very seldom have had a public speaking after COVID this size. I've had smaller sizes. And I decided to develop a little PowerPoint so that the PowerPoint can I'll walk through the PowerPoint, I'll talk a little bit about stuff, tell some stories, and I would appreciate whenever you have a question, just raise your hand. I'm not one of these that you have to wait till the end, it's gonna be fun. I want it to be interactive. So, one question everybody asks is, why did you write the book? How did you come around to writing this book? You were doing music, you were at the EPA, why did you all of a sudden write this book? And I apologize if people have heard this before, if you've been on my social media sites, there's a lot of interviews that I've done that I kind of answer this question, but I thought there might be some people that are not familiar with it, and I think it's not a bad story to tell. I have two sons, Keon and Ryan. Keon is now 26, Ryan is 22. Keon was about 12 years old, and he came home after 9/11 and was very upset. And I said, why are you so upset? He said, some kid, a bully type kid, pushed me and hit me in the stomach and said, go back to Iraq. And so I got very upset. I said, what's his father's name? And so I called the father. Father, more ignorant than the son. So I hung up on him in anger. And then I told my wife, I said, I can't change every ignorant person's mind about what Iran's about. But I can change my own kid's mind if I take him there. And so I told my wife, who's American, Moana, who actually edited the book, I told her, we should go to Iran. And she loves to travel, and she was right away, yeah, let's go. And you say something, and then time passes, and then you say, well, the kid didn't bother my kid anymore, so I was like, okay, we don't need to go now. And then we were watching Rick Steves, the travel guy. He had a show on Iran, so they'd gone in 2009 to Esfahan, and it was just so wonderful seeing these little Iranian girls running around talking to him, and he was so impressed because of, again, the press giving the wrong image of Iran. And even that got me very nostalgic, but what really hit home for me was when I was watching Cinema Paradiso, or Italian's Cinema Paradiso. And I don't know if you're familiar with that movie or remember it, but basically there was this little kid, Salvatore, that lives in Sicily, and he doesn't have a father, and this projectionist of a movie theater becomes his surrogate father and helps him, teaches him about life and love and all these things. And it was a funny movie that they had a priest had to always approve the movies, a priest, and the priest never allowed kisses in the movie, so they would always have to cut the kisses. And so this Salvatore goes to Rome and becomes this really famous film director, and 35 years after this event where he becomes this film director, they write to him and say that they call him and they say that Alfredo, the projectionist, has died, and there's going to be a funeral for him in Sicily. And at first he doesn't know if he's going to go or not, and then he decides, I'm going to go. And what's interesting is that when he goes back, Alfredo had left something for him, and it was a reel of all the kiss scenes, a montage of all the kiss scenes that had been cut. It was very, you just cry talking about it. So I was just watching this, and I was going, 35 years? How long has it been that I've been out of Iran? And I started counting, it was 35 years, and I started to cry like a baby. And my wife and the kids said, what's the matter? And I got out of we were watching it at home. I got out of the room, went into another room just to control myself. And they said, oh, Dad, I know it's a sad movie, but, why are you crying so much? I said, because that's the amount of years that I've been, and I miss it. And so I told my father, and my father set it all up with the relatives in Iran and everything. So we went to Iran, and it was like the best trip we'd ever taken. And we went to visit Iran. and I took my sons to Persepolis, Takht Jamshid, and I sat them down, and I remember telling my son, I said, this is where Alexander, not the Great, I said, don't ever call him the Great. He destroyed our country, but most importantly, for authors here, and I told this to Susan Perry, he destroyed the Persepolis Library, which housed thousands of books and scrolls and historic things that if today these existed, we might see history of the world a totally different way. So he was a traitor to the world's culture. That's why I see it. My Greek friends disagree, but I call him Alexander of Macedonia, and that's it. And I put a chapter in the book, Crossing the Caspian, where Nasser Sultan, my grandfather, meets a Greek guy, and they have this discussion. And I showed my son we're sitting on top of this mountain hill, basically, and I showed him the plains, and I said, just think, Alexander was probably coming from the west, from that part, and and I wanted my kid to see it. So we went to Shiraz and all these other places, and when we came back, I told him, I said, if anybody ever tells you, go back to Iran, you don't take it as an insult. First of all, you tell them, where should I run? Because it's not Iran, it's Iran, number one. And I said, number two, never take it as an insult. The way he was telling him was like, go to hell, go to Iran, I said, never take it like an insult. Actually say, I'd gladly go back. It was a great country. And they saw the greatness of it, even these little kids. And so, when we were in Iran, we passed by Meidun Ferdowsi Square. And my grandmothers lived in a 2-bedroom flat in the building that was a whole block of this Meidun Ferdowsi called Saftamana Arya building, which was owned by my cousin whose last name was Arya. And my grandmother had this 2-bedroom apartment there. And I told Juan, I said, this is where my grandmother told me a story. And I started telling her the story. And she said, that's amazing, you should write this story. And I said, yeah, okay, just like I should go to Iran, and then 10 years later. And so that passed, and we went to Shiraz on the same trip. And we're driving from Shiraz to Persepolis, about 30 miles away. And the taxi driver noticed that my wife was American. I was constantly translating. I came back from that trip and I was sick for 10 days because I was speaking all the time. Then I would translate all the time. Then I'd have to come home and call my mom and dad and give the report to my dad. Yes, I took the shirt that you wanted to cousin so-and-so, That's my cousin's. So, we're just going, and this taxi driver says, your wife is American? I say yes, and he turns the mirror so he can talk to her in the back seat, and he says, welcome to America, welcome to Iran. We love America, we love America, we love America. Everybody there was, just trying to make the relations better. And I said, where did you learn English? Broken English. And he said, I learned it at the garrison in Shiraz. So, in my chapter, in my book, I have a few chapters where it happened in the garrison. I actually visited and stayed at that garrison because my uncle, Fatullah Minbashian, who became the head of the armed forces, lived there. He was the commander of the garrison. And so I said, my uncle used to be the commander. When were you there? He said, in the 70s. I said, well, he was a commander then. He said, what's his name? I said 60s, 70s. He said, what's his name? I said, General Minbashian. Sepehr Haddad. And he pulled, actually, brother. He pulled the taxi aside, saluting me. And that's what's funny, when people, see me and they think that somebody at some dinner, one of these old generals, somebody said, that's Minbashian's nephew, and he got up and he saluted me at the table. But anyway, that's how much people feel for Iran and feel for that past glorious history that we have. And so this taxi driver did all this kind of stuff. At that point, Moana was like, if you don't write this story, then something's wrong with you. Because if we pass, as Nazi was saying, once a generation passes, my kids were not interested in anything Iran. And the newer generation, I see them, they like it, they love Iran, but they're here, they're gonna have their lives here, they're not gonna go back. So there was some way that I wanted to document not only my family's history, but also, if you've noticed in the book, if you've read it, the poetry, the fables. You know, in Iran, I remember in high school, our teacher, like, we would do something wrong, and then our teacher in Iran, Zami, you remember, instead of telling you you did something wrong, he'd start telling, either reciting a poem, which we wouldn't know what it meant, but it had a meaning, or a story, that one day there was a man, and at the end it was like, don't do this. And so I put these in there. I put all these fables in there, all these stories in there, all that, because I wanted to have a compilation of everything beautiful about Iran that I remember. The food, the sights, the jokes, the humor, the, everything. And so that's why I wrote the book. And I dedicated the book to my two sons, Kian and Ryan, so they wouldn't forget their Persian roots. Now that doesn't mean that they'll read your book, even if you dedicate it. And they hadn't for a long time. Now they have, because their arm got twisted so much that finally they're okay. And they read it and they loved it, actually. They came in and said, Dad, this was great, thank you, And, they didn't think, they thought it was going to be more of a history book, trying to teach the history of Iran. And I tried to really stay away from that. Maximum power, one paragraph here, one paragraph there, but that was it. And so that was my reason for writing the book. So now I'm going to go to my second topic that I wanted to talk about. Okay, so the one thing in this book, when I was writing it, at some point I had a difficulty writing about my grandfather, because the only things I knew about my grandfather was what I had heard from my grandmother, what I heard from my mother, and what my uncle, Sepehr Haddad, that became the first Minister of Culture of Iran, had told me. And articles, newspaper. And he really helped me. He lived till 100. He died 2 years ago in Los Angeles. He really helped me. I would talk to him weekly, and just back and forth. And so, for example, there's a segment in Shiraz where I had written a page and a half that Nasultan goes to Shiraz, because this is true. It's historical fiction, and as Suzanne Parry so wonderfully had written in her article, she had said that historical fiction has a range from total fiction to kind of fact, and she astutely noticed that my book is really mostly fact, with fiction being the conversations, private, intimate conversations between my grandfather and his and the Princess Irina. And one of the reasons, of course, is that he probably would never told my grandmother those intimate conversations. I mean, smart, he wasn't that clueless about it. And number two was that my grandmother had given me certain anchors when she had told me this story. Like she had told me what the Tsar had done when he had found out. She had told me how my grandfather would sit next to Princess Irina on the piano. By the way, I've read a lot of criticisms. I'm getting, reviews and stuff. People write to me and they say, impossible, this would have never happened. They say stuff like that. But my grandmother in 1978 told me this story. And in 1978, there was no Google, or at least I had no access to it. Maybe some high-level defense minister person had it. But there was no way to check it. But the things she said were amazing. Like the one thing she said is that your grandfather fell in love with a Russian princess. Didn't know her name, but she said this princess was the only niece of the Tsar and was loved like his own daughter. She was loved. When I Googled this after Moana told me, you gotta write this book, and I came back and I started beginning to write it, I did the research first. And it said that only one niece that he loved like his own daughter. I mean, why would my grandmother even tell me this story? Why would she say that? So she said that they sat at the piano, playing piano forehand. And in 1978, I didn't even know what that meant. How do two people sit at the same? Aren't you gonna bump into each other? I thought she meant two piano duet, where two people are playing with two pianos. I'd seen that. But I did the research on that, and I saw, yes, that his father, Salar Muazzaz, my great-grandfather, and Nasser Sultan both wrote marches for forehand, some of them. And even Rimsky-Korsakov, who my great-grandfather studied with, and I'll get into it in more detail, had actually had my great-grandfather as a music examination. They had to orchestrate symphonies and stuff like that. So four hand. So they loved these four-hand marches that would play four-hand piano, that kind of stuff. She would say, for example, that your grandfather told me that when his hand would go over Irina's hand, their wrists would touch, his heart was beating out of his chest. I wrote that's exactly the way she told me. She told me who had betrayed their love. I wrote it exactly how it was. She told me how it was when the Tsar found out. It was exactly what it was. She told me that when my grandfather comes back to Iran, he tells my great-grandfather, that I'm in love with a Russian woman. That when he left, they called in the manservant and they said, any letter that comes from Russia, you bring it to me. And any letter Nasrullah Khan writes to Russia, you bring it to me. And he did, supposedly. So that was what I heard. My grandmother told me all of it. So all of these things were real. They're not fantasy. When you tell American audiences, a lot of them, this, they do not believe it. They say, no way if your grandfather was in love with a Russian princess. And supposedly the Tsar had allowed that to happen at some point. Would your family have rejected it? But they don't know Persian family. My grandmother didn't care that she was the Russian queen or whatever, it doesn't matter. She wanted an Iranian or at least a Muslim, something that was more, she wanted to hang with her daughter-in-law. She didn't want some foreigner. Doesn't matter if she's a princess. But here they can't get it because the minute you say princess, they think, Catherine in England. And everybody would want their son to be married to her. So let me start a little bit of and I just bought this for this, so I might not be good at using it. Let me test it out. So I decided to put that there because I can see just in this room with all these people, I've seen friends here from 40 years ago, friends from companies that I used to work with in California have come today. And I know a lot of you. I can't see a lot of you because of the masks, but I met you. My own cousin, Shaheen there. Everyone has a story. Every one of you. And I know a lot of your stories. And they would be great to hear. I'm not saying you have to write a book. But I wanted to ask that you document it some way. Either write it down, do a voice recording, pictures, album, put the name of these people. Because that's what my dad used to do, but it really bothered me. Because he would write the name of everybody on the back of the photo, but then he would put a number on the face of the person in the photo so I could correspond, And so all the photos are 1, 2, 3, number 30, who's 36, but his eyes are all covered by 36. So don't do it that way, because now it's all digital, you can do it. But really, do document it. I know my friend Farzad Khadri is here. He's documenting Iran in a beautiful way through photography. That's what I'm talking about. Because the next generation, that's what we have to leave them. Photos, videos, sound recordings, books, music, whatever. So that was my one request before we go forward. So a lot of you probably don't like this picture. This brings back bad memories for a lot of us. Unless you like that government, so I'm not judging. But this was the day my grandmother told me the story. It was the day after martial law had been declared in 1978. We were in the Caspian Sea. By the way, I had a bunch of chapters in this book that I sent my book to publishers, literary agents. So after hearing from them and their feedback, I took out a few chapters. But I'm glad that I can take this time and talk about those chapters because they felt that those chapters would make it a little bit too much like a history lesson rather than a good story that you get into right away. And so I took them out. But my brother Kaveh and I and my parents were at the Casmisi in Charlouse. And Kaveh came to us 6:30 in the morning with a transistor radio. And he said, listen what they're saying. And we were listening to it, and it had this really weird music with flutes and da-da-dum, and then flutes, and then very eerie, very eerie. And then an announcement came, and the lady said, there is announcement of martial law in Tehran and another 11 cities or something in Iran. And from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m., I think it was, you could only go out. And after that, you couldn't go out in the street, martial law. More than 2 people couldn't congregate. If you were, and I saw this myself in Maison Berkeley, if more than 2 people were walking together, the police would come and separate them. But Iran, they'd separate them, and they're like a river, they'd come back together 5 meters away, and again, the police would separate them. And so, we went to leave right away, because my dad said, oh my God, everybody's heard this, they're gonna rush back to Tehran, and as you all remember, the Charlouse Road, I mean, not you all, but the ones who have been there. The Charlouse Road, 2 lanes, a big tunnel, bottleneck. So we rushed out, but before we rushed out to go, we went to get kuluche, which is a Persian, beautiful cookie they sell mostly in the Caspian area. I didn't see it anywhere else. And we love that, and we wanted to take it home to Tehran. And I had my tennis shorts on, like usual, and a t-shirt. And I rushed in to go buy the kuluches. They were sitting in the car. I come out, and a crowd started gathering around me. This was the first time it ever happened to me. That's why I'm saying that most of us were clueless when this happened. Most of us thought it'll pass. I believe most of us thought that, or else everybody would have either been out or would have been fighting it. So we thought, it'll pass, this is no big deal, they'll control this. This is nothing. And this is when I should have been clued in, but I was a kid, so I didn't understand. They came, and this whole circle of people started crowding in more and more and more. And I started getting nervous. I said, what's the matter? And some spokesman of them came forth, and he said, a bearded man really looking angry. And he said, what are you doing? And I said, what? I went to buy kuluche. I said, no, I mean, why are your legs naked? My wife and my daughters and everybody are here. They're not supposed to see our naked legs. And I was like, what? I've come here all in Charlouse. I was coming all the time, going and all that. And all of a sudden, this day, they freaked me out. They said, go home and wear pants from now on and have respect for our ladies. And I ran into the car, freaked out, and we took off. That was my first signal that, something, but I didn't get it. And I'll throw in this side tangent because I didn't do the book. I thought about this a lot when I was doing the research. Like, what other signs could we have seen? Like, what was it? Why did people revolt? This country was moving forward, maybe too fast. Yes, I agree. But what was it? And, I come to the conclusion that it's lack of education, and that's it. That there were a lot of uneducated people that were very gullible and could get gullible, get persuaded because there was no other. And we see it even here today in the States. There are many issues that some people disagree with where they haven't done the scientific, they haven't read the science, whatever. Vaccines can be one of them, that kind of thing. And so it reminded me that we had a gardener in that same Charlouse that one day was spraying a pesticide. No shirt, just a pair of pants. No shoes, just sandals. No mask, nothing. The pesticide he was spraying, the tank that he had on his back, it was a backpack sprayer, had a skull and crossbones. Danger. And I told him, I said, what are you doing? And he said, I'm spraying to kill the insect. I said, I know, but this skull and crossbones, that means that this is very dangerous for you. It's gonna affect you. And he said, just like this. This is for those little insects. It's not gonna affect me. And I said, no, you don't know. It's gonna affect you. And he's like, thank you, no need. Half an hour later, he's crying and everything. I look out, he's on the ground, holding his stomach, cramped up, because these were pesticides that affect your nervous system. And my dad said, let's take him to the clinic, local clinic in Charlotte. So we drive this guy in the back, I'm dying, just overly, I'm gonna die in a minute, rushing him to this place. We get there, and Iran was developing so much at the time, they didn't even have doctors. The doctors were from India. They were importing doctors. And so this man was a Sikh, spoke only English. So he had to have a translator there when he wanted to do something. So they put the man on there. I said, hey, listen, he's had pesticide poisoning, because I knew this. I said, he had pesticide poisoning. I don't know what you give him for that. He said, atropine. We got to give him a shot of atropine to let loosen the muscles. He can't breathe. And he was saying, I'm dying, just like this. Help me, just do something. And so I said, okay, listen, he's gonna take care of you. He said, what's he gonna do? I said, all he needs to do is give you a shot. He said, no, I'm okay. He got up from the thing. He was afraid of that needle.